Okay, Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about your time in social work profession?
As usual, most questions are loaded questions. So I'm not sure I've told you this story, so I will. It goes back to 1982. And I'll abbreviate the story for you so that it isn't too long. So I had been advocating for social justice. We were at a protest. This one was in New York City for the second special session on disarmament of nuclear weapons. And out of that came a decision in my life. And it kind of has characteristics of a Christian principle. So I'll, again, not go into too much depth with that, but the decision was I was either going to go to federal prison for a very long time for protesting against the federal government, or I was going to go to school and get my master's degree. So, even though the Spirit spoke very strongly in terms of going to federal prison, I had at that point, I had 2 children and we became pregnant for our third. So, the old saying about the better part of valor. So anyway, I went to school. So I have been in the profession, working as a social worker since 1985, getting my master's in 1986. Over the course of that time, I've spent, I guess that makes 30 years of time working with individuals in recovery from addictions, physical, mental, and emotional health disorders. And voila, these many years later, part of what we do in terms of supervising the next generation of social workers here at Steepletown.
Okay, could you tell us your thoughts and opinion on Core Competency 5 events, human rights and social economic justice? The first, practice behavior, understanding the forms of magnetisms of oppression and discrimination.
In that I live this as a part of the nature of my spiritual life, which is part of our belief system, or our belief system is a part of our spiritual life. So for me, the context of human dignity is very strong, very important. And social justice and the context of equanimity, that we are not all the same, but that we all ought to be treated with the same dignity and justice, and that many of us know that in our society that is not the nature of our reality. So from my undergraduate days, when I became, I think that the good term today is a progressive, that I became in some ways radicalized towards social justice, that it wasn't about, so I have an undergraduate degree in political science and sociology and a master's in social work, that it was always about recognizing the dispossessed of our society and to some extent standing with that community rather than the 1% that is exploitive, and the very fact of money is to some extent a quality of, I don't know, sin or error or malfeasance. So you have choices. You have choices every day. This morning, being Earth Day, I certainly could have gotten in my car and turned the key and driven where I had to go, including here. But that I have it's just personal. It's not about what anybody else does. So this is about how I have to live my life in order to feel good about myself when I go to bed at the end of the day or something. That, that it's not, it's a little cool out today, but hey, it's Earth Day. And for me, that means like, how can I get through this day without increasing my carbon footprint? So I can get on my bike, I can do that. So that I teach currently in a college arena the nature of social problems, and that social workers' effort is to engage in aiding individuals, groups, areas of society to aid individuals in getting from point A to point B. The nature of social work aiding as a BSW, in case management, you are providing referrals. So that's a good thing. That's a position that I hope, Sarah, that you'll be able to engage pretty quickly. So we make choices. We make choices that early on in this internship, when we sat here and I said to you, hey, just because you can have a BSW doesn't mean that you have to do this kind of work. You're going to have a degree. You can do a lot of things with this. So choices are not made for us. We have to live with our choices. And that's, I guess, what I'm saying about the nature of this core competency is this is how I have to live in order for me to be whole. I'm blessed, if you will, in having this opportunity to provide you with some degree of experience or supervision in this process. I have the ability to teach these undergraduate students the nature of social problems, or facilitate that process, I guess is the way I see it more. That I have this opportunity to work with individuals in my practice to aid them in, kind of getting from point A to point B. So to me, it's part of the joy of living. It's like breathing. We have this wonderful thing that's been given to us. No sense being upset about it. We just do it. We do it because we can.
Since you teach social problems, which would be so easy for this competency because it's such together, and to advocate for human rights and social and economic justice, that's a big part of teaching social problems, because I know teaching social problems and me taking social problems was learning what all problems that are out there in the world that people are getting discriminated against, oppressed against. And what do you tell your students about advocating against these problems? Because that fit right into the core competency.
Teaching is different from, this is a sociology class, not a social work class. So to recognize that at some point in academia, it is not so much advocating. It is, as I said a moment ago, it is facilitating there your development of yourself, the development of your awareness. At least this is my perspective on it, of course. So that it isn't about like, you got to do this, as much as here's a context of socioeconomic status. Here's a context of that the 1% in our society that owns 38% of the resources, and the 2% that owns 50% of the resources, that 80 multi-billionaires in our society own more than the bottom 50% of the citizens on planet Earth. You know, there's just something unfair about that. But I can't, I mean, all I can do is I can say, okay, here's the information. You know, and in the text of social problems, that's like, okay, can you take that in? Can you chew on that? Can you what is it when you take in food, you digest it, and then it goes into you, and then it comes up here, and then you got to do something with it. And so this is at the point in your life after you have had the wealth of experience that you have had that brings you here. You're being parent, and you're being veteran, and you're being African American female. You know, there's a master status maybe in there somewhere, but I'm not to choose that. So it's like that for me. It's not like I'm going to say, this is what you must do, as much as, because that's kind of this free society that we live in, so to speak. You know, they call it a free society, but are any of us who are really poor, and I'm not poor, but are we really free, you know, to do what we want? So it's a fine line, I guess, in my final piece on this question for you, is a fine line between advocating, instructing, facilitating the dissemination of information. Does that make any sense?
Right. What about, do you give any examples about, you know, practicing, you know, any of that examples about you practicing anything about, you know, economic and social justice in your class or when you're doing supervision?
Well, I wonder if some of the, like you've heard some stories over the course of, and that you and I have shared a few stories over the course of time. I believe that that's one of the characteristics of relationship, is a true kind of opening of self. And in the opening of self, there's a vulnerability that comes with that. And so, you know, when I say to you on, you know, some tape that, you know, that I made that choice between, you know, getting busted by the feds or going to get my master's in social work, that, you know, there's some like one who gives a darn. There's that piece of it, that it isn't, it's got to be relevant. And I'm not saying that I'm always relevant, because I guess you would have an opinion about that as well. Like, oh, is there meaning to the story? So, yes, I'd say that I would hope to be an authentic person, both in clinical supervision as well as if I'm doing clinical therapy or whether I'm teaching, that it's important for us to be authentic. And so I'm not sure that I always accomplish the goal. Again, somebody else might have more of a perspective on that than myself. So, but I would clearly say